Hello everyone, I'm the Black Shadow, and we're back to another episode for Top 5, a series where we take a specific topic for the world of Dune Imperium, and I give you my tips and tricks to help improve your game. We're in the midst of going through the various leaders introduced in Bloodlines for Dune Imperium Uprising, and next up on the list is going to be Baron Harkonnen's trusted Mentat, Piter De Vries. Now, they say that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and there's a bit of truth in that, to be fair, with Piter. The character itself in the lore has gone through a lot, and while we're admittedly quite a long way from the Brad Dourif days, Piter is introduced into Bloodlines as one of several leaders that have had cards in previous versions of the game, and now are their own leader. And indeed, Piter does follow from the Baron's strategy of trying to outwit and kind of basically trick his opponents, going usually a very intrigue-heavy style, whereas the Baron was able to buy effectively intrigues by paying a bit of slow with his ring. Piter in this game has his own unique deck of intrigue, which is super cool and a really fun mechanic. It does mean that Piter is a little bit subject to luck though sometimes, because inherently you don't know quite what you're going to draw and when you're going to draw it, so it can make planning in advance a little bit difficult, but there are still some general concepts that you can bring forward and approach Piter to kind of be a bit of a smoother game. I've seen Piter have really, really awesome games, just steamroll tables. I've seen him have kind of miserable times as well. So I think overall, maybe a little bit hit and miss, and probably not the strongest leader going in Bloodlines, but he can be definitely a lot of fun. And if things do go kind of your way, you can be really, really tricky to deal with. So let's have a look at Piter's leader abilities, and we'll start off with one that's already been alluded to, and that is his passive ability, Twisted Genius. Heck of a name, right? So, at the start of the game, Piter gets access to his Twisted Intrigue deck. It is a deck of 12 cards that are unique to Piter. He's the only person that can immediately access them. And at the start of every single round, you draw one of those intrigues into your hand. These do count as intrigue cards in a more general basis, which means that they can be stolen at secrets. And so you do have sometimes situations where Piter De Vries intrigues can end up getting across to other people on the table, as they do count towards those limits. It's rare, but it definitely does happen. Yeah, it's pretty decent. Again, there are 12 intrigues part of the deck here. It is worth noting that the backs of them are the same as the normal intrigue deck. So while obviously you're going to be drawing them yourself, as the game goes on, people might struggle to keep track of how many of these intrigues are yours and how many actual intrigues you've got. So well worth keeping that in mind. So how good are these intrigue cards? Well, they're okay, at least. Bear in mind that, again, these are absolutely free. So there is a bit of balancing the respect that you can't really make these incredibly powerful because they'd be incredibly warping, but they still need to have some interesting and useful effects. And to be fair, I think these generally do. First thing you'll notice as you kind of scroll through these is there are quite a few that involve troops, and quite a lot of them, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them involve using up your own troops to do something. When you play with Piter, he can be a little bit of a grind machine in that respect, where you're effectively just sacrificing your own troops in order to do effects. This means that you do have to be cautious with how you're using your troops, because you might well draw these cards all of a sudden require you to kind of have the uses for them to do stuff, and you'll notice that all of them there lose troops. Some of them from the conflict, some of them just anywhere you want, but you've got to bear that in mind. It does mean as well that if other players are going against you, they will also note that you might well have intrigues that require sacrificing troops. So while it seems good on paper, you could look to put in 3 troops on a city space and then use Ambitious to sack them off. Other players might be a little bit more wary of troops that you put in, especially if you put them kind of weirdly and with no real obvious purpose. They're going to suspect that you might well be trying just to sacrifice them and trying to bait people out. So just be a little bit careful. Those with a bit more experience behind them can sometimes sniff out what you're trying to do. But of course, you might not have those intrigues by any respect, and it does mean that there is always potential for players to misplay against you, either overcommitting or perhaps undercommitting, expecting you to retreat your troops, and all of a sudden you bust out a load of swords and now taken by surprise. And again, this is very much Piter's game plan here, is to make him really awkward to play against in combat, as well as a bit of general assistance around the general game as well, just for him to kind of get out of, especially a few times, some iffy spots, some tricky card draws, some resource you need at a pinch, and just trying to smooth over a couple of cracks you can find over the course of the game as well. There are definitely some that are worth highlighting here outside of that. Resourceful is, I actually think, really, really solid. This is a great card to draw early in the game to avoid having to deal with a situation you might just draw your hand really funny, and so you've got some guaranteed access. It also means that you can sometimes send cards that have got a really powerful effect but only have faction access, for example, and those get blocked up. You don't have spice for it. Well, you can now send it to a city space and get its effect out, so that can be definitely pretty cool. Other ones that are worth noting as well, Unnatural is pretty solid for trashing an intrigue to draw another one. You can trash either a base one here or a regular intrigue if you so decide. Insidious is also really cool as well. This basically allows you to give another intrigue in your hand to an opponent at the table. You get a spice regardless. If it's a non-twist intrigue, you get a second one. But it means that you can do some crazy stuff with this, including deliberately making someone go over the limit of intrigues so that you can then go to sequence and steal for them. You see it very rarely, and it is pretty wild, but Piter is definitely the only person that can do anything like this. So some really interesting effects in these, and I really do appreciate that. But yeah, overall, don't expect these to like save your game or anything like that, but definitely something's getting pretty strong. Ambitious can be a really tricky way of getting a double bump to steal factions. Sinister is also interesting as well. This is a combat intrigue to lose 2 troops, but they don't have to be the troops of the conflict. You can sacrifice garrison troops to get another intrigue, basically, and a Solara. If you're trying to just like dig for an intrigue to win a fight desperately, it's something you can do as well. So you can play around with these a lot. So I think there's a lot of fun stuff going on here. But yeah, a lot of fun. But again, because several of these require you to spend troops in order to enact them, it means that troops become a more valuable resource for you to keep an eye on and what you're doing when you're playing as Piter. And this leads into his ring ability, which will go across here, the Harkonnen Advisor. You get to recruit a troop whenever you use the ring. It's pretty straightforward. However, the troop you recruit with the ring can't actually deploy to the conflict. That is a specific ruling which you've got to be a little bit careful of, actually. Instead of, say, Gertie Halleck, who can do whatever he wants with that troop, and, say, Duncan Idaho, who can send his agents into battle, Piter can garrison the troop, but can't actually send it out, which means that you're not using his ring to go like Arakeen for shock value, anything like that. This is a way of kind of building up garrison, to feed some of these combat, these intrigues of using troops, but also it's just a way of being able to get a little bit extra out of some extra spots as well. So for Piter, you can go to Assembly Hall with his ring, get an intrigue, a persuasion, and a troop, and maybe the commander as well is pretty nice. Sending the ring to accept contract as well. Generally, you can be sending the ring trying to get to like Landrad spaces a lot of the time, and it's a nice way of just getting that little extra bonus troop into your garrison. It means that, again, you've got the ability to use those intrigues if you have them, but also it just means you've always got troops dotted around as well, so you can always kind of be contesting for some of the less rewards in combat, or just an extra way of garrisoning up a little bit. You can go gather support and get free troops for no Solara, which is not actually that bad at all. It's a nice way of just getting yourself ready for future combats. So 2 things I will note regarding the ring in addition. Whenever someone is playing as Piter, just do keep a little extra eye on when people use their ring ability with Piter. It is incredibly easy to forget that you can't deploy the troop into the conflict this turn, especially if we're playing at home or like on Tabletop Simulator, for example. There's nothing stopping you, send the ring, go into Arakeen, you get the extra troop and think, okay, all right, let's go in for the fight, and you can't do that. You can only put in the free. So just be a little bit careful. Very easy to miss that. The other thing I would also want to note as well is that, again, you've got the troops garrisoning there, so what you're always looking for as well is ways to actually deploy them in a future way. So that can be maybe with techs. If you can get on a rapid dropships, for example, it's already incredibly powerful tech, but that's really nice for Piter. Again, you can't deploy the troop to the conflict that turn, but you can use dropships on any agent turn that you want. So you can easily garrison with Harkonnen Advisor the round before and then get going there. It also means that if you've got anything in the Imperium row that lets you deploy on reveal turns, it's also pretty good. So you're looking at the likes of, here we are, Ruthless Leadership, which is one of the promo cards, which lets you deploy on reveal if you get the command effect. Also something like Holy War as well, which lets you deploy with the Fremen Bond if you've got that and stuff like that. I wouldn't say going out of your ways to try and do stuff like this, but it's a nice little extra bonus if you can kind of find ways to deploy on reveal and just give yourself the extra little bit of flexibility. But generally, it's not what you're going to be doing with Piter on the whole. So next up, let's talk about seat positions for Piter De Vries and where he might look to excel on the table. Piter is a pretty solid all-rounder, truth be told, in his approach. But of course, the idea being is you want to build up these intrigues means that you're trying to make yourself really awkward to be fought against in combat. So inherently there feels like a bit of synergy with picking him probably later on down the order into these sort of seats here. Because it means in the early combats you do have a couple of extra intrigues which can make people second guess what you're going to try to do. But it also means that when you come to round 7, for example, you're in a good spot to get deploying early. And even if you've got sort of intrigues, the Piter's intrigues aren't doing necessarily a whole lot by that point, hopefully you've got yourself set up in a decent spot to go fighting and having used the previous couple of rounds to set yourself up doing that. Using the Harkonnen Advisor to get some extra garrison so you can really go after like the round 7 fight and try and get some victory points. But honestly, I think Piter's probably decent anywhere. I think it's more important to kind of like play the game sort of more appropriately. And what I mean by that is that there are obviously some leaders that you have to approach kind of a specific way, and certainly some of the leaders we talk about later on in this series that you've got to be kind of disciplined with. But because Piter, his intrigues are random and you don't quite know what you're going to get, it makes trying to pick a specific spot for him based on that kind of really difficult to do. You could definitely opt to go for like a second seat maybe and look to try to rush Fremen using your ring to get some extra garrison so that in round sort of like 3 or so you've got a bit extra troops to chuck worms in on fights, try and win stuff like that. But even on first seat, like I don't think it's really that big a deal because you can go to Fremen, you can get in troops on Fremkit or Desert Tactics, and then you might have the intrigue to lose troops in the conflict. And if it's a juicy conflict, everyone else is going to feel more inclined to go heavier into the fight, and then you just sacrifice off your troops, and then everyone else is heavily spent, and then in round 2 you're then last to act. You've kind of saved a bit of battle strength potentially, and then everyone else is drained, so you can go ahead and attack that. So you can kind of approach it in a variety of different ways. I think it's more about adjusting your game plan to what seat you're in if you're going to take Piter, rather than let Piter deciding how you're going to approach it. Have more of a focus on what are the Imperium Road cards, what you're going to go for here. Are there decent contracts for you that you might want to go for? Piter definitely does get some extra synergy from hitting council spots with his ring. Imperial Privilege is definitely a nice place for him to go because, of course, you can, with Imperial Privilege, sacrifice an intrigue to redraw, and that means that if you do have a couple of Piter's own intrigues which aren't particularly strong, aren't doing a lot for you, well, you can go to Imperial Privilege of the Ring, you can get a troop in your garrison, and you can sack off one of his twisted intrigues for a regular one, which might well be a lot more useful for you. So definitely Piter going down the Emperor line is generally pretty decent if the contracts are there for you, but of course Imperial Privilege is pretty expensive on the whole. You want to still make sure you get in Swordmaster High Council, so if you're going to do this, you're going to need some decent Solari generation, so just be a little cautious of that. So it's on to the 5th point, which is my wildcard round for Piter. A couple of things I've already made a mention of already. Again, his twisted intrigues have quite a lot of very funky effects, which means it can be a little bit tricky to know how to plan in advance. Sometimes for Piter, you can be a bit more reactive to what intrigues you're drawing, but that's nothing really too big a deal with that, and definitely is pretty useful. But again, be careful of the fact that as you're drawing your twisted intrigues, if you're not using them, and if you're getting hold of other intrigues, you can definitely be stolen from, and it's definitely not uncommon in Piter De Vries games for there to be some secret stealing going on one way or the other. So do bear in mind, if you're going to take him, who has Bene Gesserit access, who has access to secrets, and keep track of those diplomacies. If there's a lot of Bene Gesserit access on the Imperium row, then you need to bear in mind you're going to need to use his intrigues a lot more aggressively. But if there's very limited access, people got other things to do, they're probably not going to be going secrets a lot. They're going to want to go to espionage. They're going to want to hit Fremen, maybe go dutiful for some contract, stuff like that. Secrets might not be a particularly high priority target, and people want to go secrets to steal proper intrigues as such. They don't really want to go for it to steal, like Piter's gain a Solari for each type of unit it's in the combat. It's nice, but they'd probably want something with more battle strength or end-game value. So people are going to be a little bit less inclined to hit this, I think, overall. On that note, there are 3 techs I just want to make a quick note about here, as they do have some kind of interesting synergy in how they work in regards to Piter De Vries. First up is Genlock Vault. So this is the 2 Spicer, which lets you have more intrigues in hand. Instead of being stolen if you have 4 more, this gives you 5 or more instead. You have that 1 extra slot. Inherently, seems pretty good for Piter, and it's probably better for him than most other leaders going. I wouldn't really go out of my way to pick this up, however, all things being equal. I wouldn't be going, specifically for this. But if you can find a way to pick it up, if you can pick up your Swordmaster, Assembly Hall, especially High Council, and you can pick this up for like a spice on the side, definitely nice. It helps you not be so swamped and feeling you've got to get like your twist intrigues out, because sometimes they can draw out in a bit of a weird way. So that's definitely quite useful. Another one I will also point out as well is Advanced Data Analysis. This is the one where you trash an active spy that you've got on the board, and you're able to draw an intrigue every round, basically, by flipping this. This can definitely sometimes really heavily snowball for Piter, and you can just be spinning intrigues and all sorts. And I've definitely seen a couple of games where people have grabbed this and are basically just rocking around with 6, 7, 8 intrigues in hand, saying, go to secrets and steal it. I don't really care. And there can be some real wild stuff from that. I probably wouldn't be going out of my way to grab this. But it can make you, again, really hard to play against, especially if people aren't aggressively going after secrets, if there isn't a lot of faction access, if you're kind of locking it down with spies and hitting espionage or secrets yourself. Definitely that can put you over the edge and can be really awkward for people to deal with. And the last one I want to make point out as a rules clarification as well is Suspensor Suits. So this one, for each intrigue card you draw and steal during your turn, you get a troop, you get to deploy directly to the conflict. This does not work for Piter's intrigue deck, the Twisted Intrigues, because it is done at round start, not at your turn beginning. So anything you draw from this does not trigger Suspensor Suits. Don't worry, basically everyone has done this at some point and realized, oh, wait a second, that doesn't work. It's still a good tech and really useful. And truth be told, you can definitely still get more use of it because Secrets is going to be more active. You can get to Imperial Privilege, which is decent for Piter. Those redraws still activate for Suspensor Suits. But just bear in mind that the actual Twisted Intrigues you pull don't trigger the troops. And the last thing I'll make a note of as well is because of the way a lot of his intrigues do involve using troops, and his ring does as well, it does mean that troop generating cards from the Imperium row are more useful to Piter, as it allows you to feed those intrigues, and also it's just pretty decent anyways from building a combat engine, because Piter can definitely go down a combat route. You see some different styles of games for him. Sometimes he'll go a bit more faction-y, sometimes more spice and flowy, but Piter can be actually a really decent battle leader because he's just swimming in more intrigues than anyone else. So it means that, cards that are decent anyways, Strike Fleet, for example, very powerful, and Stilgar. Obviously, these are strong anyways, but definitely for Piter have a bit of interesting other synergy. But truth be told, anything that gives you troops on the side is actually more useful for him. Even some of the less fancy picks, I believe can obviously be pretty good if you can get that command value going. Unswerving Loyalty, I know, Piter De Vries having all this Fremen stuff, it looks a bit weird on the face of it, but it is true. But even cards like Elite Force is a really good one. Again, letting him to be able to trash cards from hand, and if you trash Emperors, getting the deployment, extra troops, extra intrigue, stuff like that. even command center as well, letting you just be able to generate more troops once you get the influence with that. Things that wouldn't necessarily really be going at your way to do with other leaders does have a bit more use for Piter De Vries. So, as I say, be reactive, be willing to adapt your kind of game plan and strategy of what you're trying to do as the game develops. Don't go in with a heavily preconceived notion, oh, I'm going to do this, I must do that. I think you've got to kind of sample things as you're going a little bit, look at the intrigue you draw, and just try and make the best decisions that you can on the fly. Be adaptive to the situation and take the chances when they present themselves. So overall thoughts then for Piter. I do think he's pretty solid. I think he's a nice all-rounder. I think he does offer a lot of kind of value and potential for things that you want to do. But you can't necessarily rely on his abilities alone carrying you throughout a game. It's very much kind of the sum of the parts of what you get given and then how you utilize them best off. There are definitely other leaders out there that have much more shock, immediate value with their abilities that they have than Piter, who's got kind of very much, again, kind of you work it out as you go and you make the best of the situation. It does mean that Piter can be quite swingy. If you play him a bit, you will have games that go really well, really smooth. The intrigues play out really nicely for you, and you're able to get a lot of success. But he's also going to have some games that it really doesn't play out very well. The intrigue timing is awkward. When you decide to lift off troops doesn't go very well either, and stuff like that, and it just kind of fizzle out into not a whole lot of going on. So that's just the nature of when you have a more intrigue-heavy leader. You're going to have a bit more of a swingy style of play. But regardless, I still think Piter is pretty good. And I think he's actually a nice leader if you've not played much Uprising to use, just to kind of get a feel for how Uprising works. Again, those extra intrigues just give you a bit of extra options early, so if you do kind of run into a bit of awkwardness early on, you'll be able to kind of dig yourself out of a couple of tricky spots and keep your game going. With that, though, we are going to end the video, so thank you very much for watching and listening. We'll be continuing our dive through the 9 leaders for Bloodlines over the course of this series. Hope you guys are finding these useful. As always, these are a little bit more kind of cursory, and looking toward beginners, intermediate sort of thing, not going into really into the depths of the weeds of these leaders. But if you've got thoughts on that sort of stuff, please, of course, chuck it down in the comment section below with thoughts, questions, anything that I might have missed, and I'll answer them as and when I see them. Other than that, though, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one.